talk for a while, but
welcome to Drupal Night, sponsored by Bauer. Tonight we have Heather Bauer presenting on some usability studies. She's a master's candidate at Bentley University and is also the usability specialist here at Bauer. So we're happy to have her speak to us tonight.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to be talking about user research when you can't reach your users. So like Michelle said, I am the junior usability specialist at BioRaft, but you'll be interested to know that there is no senior usability specialist. So really, I do a little bit of everything. I do mockups, I do user research, I look at what the developers are doing and say, yeah, that's good, or let's try that again. I am getting my master's in human factors in information design, even I can't say it, at Bentley University. I will be done in 2 months, and I'm not counting down at all, I promise. And I was also the co-organizer of the Boston Service Jam in Boston earlier this year. And BioRaft. So we help prevent the zombie apocalypse. What we do is we help make sure that lab scientists and the people who work with them are safe, trained, and compliant with university rules and some higher regulations as well. And we are hiring, so certainly talk to me, Michelle, Mike, Alex, or Seth when he comes back, and we can tell you all about that. So now about you. Are any of you usability professionals? No? Okay. Project managers? Okay. Developers? And anything else? Okay. Thank you, Michelle, for being 3 of them. So that is just a little piece of user research. It can be really simple, really quick and dirty, and that tells me a lot about who's in the room and sort of how I should talk. So our agenda, we're going to discuss a little bit about what is user experience. We're going to talk about an ideal scenario, and then we're going to talk about how the real world is not ideal. I know, I'm sure that's a shocker to you guys. And then we're going to talk about what to do with it, because I've always been told, don't just point out problems, provide solutions. So first, what is UX? This picture, before I even decided to change fields, was the thing that made it make the most sense to me. So up here, we've got our product. It's got the cereal, it's got the spoon, it's got the bowl, it's got the milk. The UX is when everything comes together, and UX is user experience. The user interface is just the spoon to actually interact with the thing. And then you've got your server and you've got your data center. Also makes me a little hungry. Good thing we just had falafel. So something I want to highlight, UX is not UI. So you will see that on the left is a list of how UX wants to be seen. There's a whole ton of different things here. And then there's how UX is typically seen, which for those of you who don't have like 20 amazing vision, it's interface design and visual design. So there's a lot more to it than that. But also the key thing about UX is users are involved. UX without U is just X, and not in the X marks the spot sort of way, in the X is in the eyes, dead, don't do it. So why should you do user research? Why does this become a giant X if you don't do it? So it helps prevent 3 of the top 12 reasons that projects fail, which it helps improve requirements definition. It creates clearer communication, even internally, not necessarily when you're just talking to your users. And it diminishes a lot of the stakeholder politics, because it's no longer Big Mucky Muck 1 wants it this way, Big Mucky Muck 2 wants it this way, and the developers want it this way. It's, okay, we talked to our users, this is what they had to say. And no one's gonna say, well, who cares about our users once you've already gone and done the research? Then there's the question of, what does successful user research look like? And like many answers in UX, the answer is, it depends. But the thing it depends on is what your research goals are. And so you could be trying to convert more users, decrease training, get more people to use it, save your developers time. I know you guys would all like that. Or reduce errors and therefore angry people. Because we all want some fewer angry people out there. So sometimes the user research has saved the day. So we're going to talk about the $300 million button. Now that seems really, really big for a single button, but an e-commerce site decided that they were going to make their checkout process really easy. You just have to register, and then you can put in your name and password and go, and it remembers all of your information. And okay, so you have to put in a little bit of work to get it started, but people won't mind that, right? They did. And so their sales were going down. They did some user research, found out that that was the barrier, changed the register button to a continue button, and their sales increased by $300 million. That's a lot of zeros for anyone who isn't imagining it. I had to do the million because otherwise I was going to get confused with all the zeros on the side. Lego was another place that did a lot of user research in the early 2000s. They were getting to the point that their market share was decreasing rapidly. And so they had started expanding in all sorts of directions, making these really complex kits with special pieces. There were theme parks. Has anyone been to a Lego theme park? I have been. It was fun, but I mean, and so they were too diversified, really. And so they sent researchers into people's homes to see how kids from 7 to 12 played, because that was their target demographic. Specifically boys. We're not going to get into that right now, but they saw how kids played in different demographics. So in the US, in Germany, and in Asia, because that's where they sold the most product. And they realized that there were very different ways that you should sell to these groups of people. Shocker, right? And so they went from thinking that, oh, you know, these 7 to 12-year-old boys, they're playing video games, so they just want things quick and easy, right? Kids these days, they just want things quick and easy. And so they actually found that there's this concept of mastery and achievement of being able to actually finish something. So they went back to the basics and went back to making more complex sets that people could put together while still having those incremental successes along the way. And they also decided that they're going to talk to those grown-ups who use Legos because, yeah, some of them are going to be a little weird, but some of them are not, and they have a lot more disposable income. They're the ones who are going to buy the $500 set. And because of that, they were able to survive the downturn in 2008 without any dip in their profits. Another time, chilling milk. So this is one of my professor's favorite stories. And they were trying to figure out how to chill milk to keep it from going bad when it goes from cows to processing plants in India. But they were basing this all on Cabot Farms in Maine. I'm sure you can imagine that the process is a little different. So they actually had some researchers go to India, go to some farms in the middle of nowhere, and be like, oh, that's not going to work. So they were able to completely skip that whole flop part of the process and skip to something that works. And a time that it didn't work so well, the 2000 presidential election. If they'd done a little bit of UX on that ballot, maybe things would have been different. Now, the key thing to remember about doing user research. There's always the question of how many people do you need to talk to? And this is a chart of about how many people and what percentage of the problems you will catch. Whether you agree with the exact slope, that's not what we're going to get into today, but the point that I do want to highlight, 0 users, 0 insights. So you need to get whatever you can, and something is better than nothing. So bearing that in mind, we're going to talk about the ideal situation. So once upon a time, there was a princess, and she decided that being royal was boring, and so obviously the next best choice was to be in user research. Of course. She had complete stakeholder buy-in. She had everyone on her team in her company understanding what the role of UX is. Everyone was involved. There were unlimited resources. Her team was experienced and diverse enough that you had different opinions, but similar enough that everyone worked well together. And there was no shortage of representative participants. Now, unfortunately, finding that person is about as difficult as finding that purple unicorn with pink spots. So we're going to talk about the reality. So we do have timelines, budgets. Stakeholders do need to be convinced occasionally, and participants don't actually grow on trees. Or if they do, they're in the middle of the rainforest somewhere and we can't find them. So unlimited time, I'm sure everyone knows that if someone says you have, unlimited time to work on this, either it becomes a fire or the project gets canceled because it's just not important enough to the business goals. And unlimited budget, not if you're at a company that wants to stay in business. Stakeholder buy-in, it varies depending on where you are and how long you've been there and how long UX has even been a concept. I know I had a conversation with my boss after being at Bauer for a couple months, and he was concerned, is your job UX-y enough for you? Are you getting enough UX out of this? And even though everything that I was doing was UX related, so I went back to that page that I showed you before about all the things that count as UX. And it's really just an educational process. It's an unwritten piece of our job description, and it gets a lot easier the longer you've been someplace because it just becomes part of the process. It becomes how things work. Now, participants. This is really the crux of what we're talking about today. Everything that I have read about user research takes the availability of some sort of participant that you can use for granted. And they say, well, okay, if you can't actually find your users, just use college students. They're good for experimenting on, right? Also, they're really easy to incentivize. $10 and a t-shirt, and they are there. But what if you require participants with specific knowledge? You know, sometimes you'll be talking to your actual target users, and you're pretty sure that on their perspective, you're speaking Greek. And when they're typing things to you, you think that like a cat might have walked across their keyboard or they fell asleep, or because they send you things like that. Now, this whole line doesn't really matter what it says, but that's all one thing. And it's the name of this pretty little compound here. That is the sort of thing that some of our users at Bauer have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so clearly I'm not in chemistry. I don't understand that. And finding people who do understand that sort of thing and therefore have enough knowledge to truly test their site is difficult because they're rare and they're hard to incentivize because really their focuses are elsewhere. So what do we do about it? I mean, clearly when I couldn't find something for a paper or my boss needed something, it's just like, oh, I can't find it. I'm totally gonna give up. No, that's not what I actually did. I found secondary sources. I found something that was close, not as good, but gets the job done. So I'm gonna go through a bunch of different solutions, including Google Analytics, and then I'm going to really talk about our different user proxies, people who you can talk to who can talk to your users. And also, teamwork is incredibly important, because if you have to go through other people, then you have to be working with them, you have to be asking questions, and you have to be keeping that conversation going. So Google Analytics, how many of you use Google Analytics on a site? Okay, yeah, that's just about everyone. So that's one of the great things. It's something that most people are already using, so it doesn't actually take extra resources, and no resources is great for when you're trying to get buy-in on a project. And it tells you a lot about your audiences, about what technology they're using. It allows you to trace the customer path, but it requires enough time to gather enough data for any of these trends to start appearing. But audience data, age, gender, sometimes interest category if people decide to disclose that information, but that's the catch. People have to decide to display that, because I know that Google knows everything there is to know about me, but it doesn't necessarily come up. Now, the technology usage is really important, because we as developers may think that IE6 is the absolute plague, but if your users are using a browser that you don't, you need to make sure to test there. Now, customer path. This is my favorite part. So you can see where people come on, where they go next, and where they drop off. You can even highlight specific starting points. So this tells you where people go, but it doesn't tell you the why. Did they drop off because they got a call from their babysitter and they had to go home, or they had a meeting, or were they just frustrated? You don't know any of that. So some of the pros are that it gives a lot of information that you're already gathering. It just repurposes it, but it takes time and you don't know the whys. Now, actually talking to people, subject matter experts, who in your company or at your client's company knows something about the domain where you are building your thing. There is going to be someone there who knows why you're doing it. Otherwise, I'm not sure why you would do it. So they likely were your target user at some point, and therefore they have great stories to tell. They go beyond the very contrived, okay, I'm going to ask you some questions, you're going to answer me sort of situation. But they've already drunk the Kool-Aid of your company. They already believe that you are doing something that is worth doing. So their stories are going to be slanted towards that. They're going to be slanted in support. And also the amount of time they've been out of industry, depending on what the industry is, some of them move really, really fast, as we in technology know. So if they've been out for 5 or 10 years, their information may not be as good anymore. So that brings me to customer support. Now, no matter what the situation is, there will always be some sort of customer support, and therefore those people will always have permission to talk to your users. No client, no matter how strict they are, is going to be like, nope, you can't help us. Nope, we're not going to let you. So they do have that limited contact, and also they see things from a different perspective. They see where our users are running into problems, because it can be real. So how many of you have ever seen a cat or baby video on the internet? Oh, good. You're all alive. Awesome. So how many of you have seen those videos where someone buys this really expensive and elaborate toy and all the baby or cat wants to do is play in the box? You can't predict that. And so you need to actually see what your users are doing, have someone there to see where they run into issues. But they can overemphasize edge cases. You get one person who does things really strangely, but they are very vocal. They keep calling in time and time again that means that it seems like a big problem when it might just be this teeny fringe. You can only do that if you do this weird roundabout thing. But they also often have metrics on these sort of issues that people are calling in about, and that can highlight some pain points for you to dig into further. So the pros, they get to talk to your users, they have a different perspective, and they have useful metrics. However, they're not trained to be neutral. They're trained to hear what the person has to say and then make them happy. So they are going to skew the conversation towards the, this is great, isn't it? As opposed to, okay, I hear what you're saying, tell me more about that. They can overemphasize edge cases, and you often miss out on the positives, because if you make a slight change that makes people's lives better, they're not really likely to write in and be like, oh my goodness, this is great, make sure you keep this. So those things can get cut out when you're trying to fix actual problems. Another resource is sales and marketing. They are kind of seen a little bit as the enemy, because they're constantly like, oh, when are you going to do this new great thing that our customers want? Yeah, they really do want it. It doesn't matter that I said, hey, do you want this thing? And everyone said yes. But they do have a relationship with the decision makers, and any good sales and marketing person is good at working the conversation around to where they want it to be. It's what they do for a living. So if they know there are particular questions that we need answered, they can figure out a way to work that in. But they are very much trained to be the opposite of neutral, because they are trying to get people to say yes. And so they don't want to hear that, oh yes, I hear this problem you're saying. But since people know that about salespeople, then this teeny tiny issue suddenly becomes this total big problem. Nope, sorry, it's a deal breaker. If you can't do jumping jacks while standing on your head, I just don't know how I'm going to be able to use the system. So that sort of blows issues out of proportions. And also, depending on your product, if they're just talking to the decision makers and not the actual end users, there's often a bit of a disconnect there. You know, if you've ever worked in a large corporation, have you ever had your boss come over and be like, oh, you do that? I didn't know you did that. How did you do that? So there is that disconnect there. Now, similar to the analytics information we were discussing before, this is another way to repurpose information that we already need. You can look at how things are configured when we're getting someone set up. They need to tell us this anyway, so we can see what patterns there are. There are people with different permissions. What sort of patterns are there? What do we know about those users without even having to talk to them? Also, how do those permissions change over time? Do we know that everyone starts off this way and then 6 months later, they're in a totally different place with what their permissions look like? Can we help them get to that place sooner? But sometimes the people who are deciding who gets to see what are a little lazy, and they say, hey, everyone knows what they're supposed to see. They're not going to go where they're not supposed to. Let them just have access to everything, because maybe they'll need it, but I don't know who would need it. And I'm sure you guys have heard a similar conversation go around in circles. And also, sometimes the patterns can be misleading. You know, it's like looking up at the clouds. It's like, oh, there's a goat. Don't you see the goat? And everyone around you is like, huh? So you want to be careful about how much you read into that. Now, I know that you guys are not usability experts, but how many of you are familiar with personas? Okay. Another piece of user research that tells me how fast to talk. So I love personas because they bring all of this information together. You've done all your various research. You've got people who are talking to your users, but they're all coming at it from different angles. And it's not like it fits into a puzzle pre-handed to you. So it allows you to see the picture that you're starting to build. It also tells you where there are gaps. So you can encourage your proxies to probe that more, or you can make some best guesses. It is not against the rules to use your imagination a little bit in personas. You're trying to make real people. So backing up a step, what are personas? Really, they're representations of a cluster of users. So it's like you have Joe Everybody who is standing there for one of your groups, and you can be like, okay, so designing for everybody is really hard, but designing for Joe, okay, what would Joe like? It makes it a lot easier. And it also helps to keep developers out of the trap of, well, I know what I would like here, so I'm just going to do that. Because sometimes your developers are your end users, or like your end users, and sometimes totally different. Remember back to the cat walking across the keyboard, making this molecule. And also it facilitates putting on that user hat and really getting in the mind of, okay, so I've got Joe, I know what he does, I know what he would think. Our go-to persona at Bauer is Roger, and you will see him later, but we are constantly talking about, okay, what, Roger wouldn't like that. Why are you doing, Roger will be really annoyed. And we talk about him like he is actually a real person. But also personas are helpful to everyone, even outside of the design and development part of the world. They're good for sales and marketing because it helps everyone talk the same language about who they're going to be sending things to. It also makes it easier for them to send out those personalized messages that they probably sent to 500 other people as well. And it also allows for some alignment. And for your executives, it gives them a really quick snapshot, and we all know that executives love quick snapshots. And so you know kind of what your customers look like. Maybe it helps to identify a gap that they want to go after, so they want to send sales and marketing after them, or they want to do some more R&D and figure out what we can do to bring that group in. And it also helps with the alignment and informing strategic direction. And product and dev, the world that we all live in, it helps to separate the ideas from, oh yeah, that's useful, we're gonna do that, and well, that's really cool, that would be a lot of fun, but it doesn't actually help our users, it would just be fun. And therefore you can also prioritize from the, oh yeah, that would be useful to, oh my goodness, Roger needs this right now, I don't know how he's doing his job without this. It also helps with QA testing, especially if you have people who are transitioning in and out of that as part of their day. They can say, okay, so I know that Roger would be using this, so let me get a quick reminder of who Roger is before I even dive in. So you are thinking as Roger and no longer as Michelle or Seth or Leslie. Not that you guys aren't wonderful people, but personas can also be really quick and easy. And so we've got Ulysses, the usability professional, who's just trying to stay up to date with what's going on. That's why he's here. And then we've got Pamela, the project manager, who's really frustrated that not enough of her projects are really getting off the ground. And then you've got Danielle, the developer, who is sick of redoing things because the customers just don't seem to like it. And you can see that there is a little bit more detail in there, but it's pretty straightforward. And those are the personas I expected to be in the room today. And so then you totally have permission to talk to people and go back and revise those, because they may be, you know, zeros and ones because they're on a screen, but they might be on paper, but they're still living and breathing. Now, here's Roger. He's our friend. And he has a lot more information because we do a lot more with his persona. You see, he's got a picture, he's got a name, and he's got a tagline. And he says, I want to be a resource. And so we've got his tagline, his position, character traits about him. We've got what his role is in Bauer, as well as various tasks he performs. Common activities, because those can be different. This isn't limited to what he does on site. And these sliders are my favorite thing, because I'm not trying to characterize him into yes or no, black or white binaries. He can be, here or there or there. And so he's allowed to be more of a real person as opposed to a caricature. And another example from the Atlassian Do Agile Right webinar, we've got a short blurb, and then we've got some stars, some sliders, a few bullet points. Now, on the total other end, we've got Chrysler and their marketing group. Now, they don't just have personas on paper. They have actual rooms that are dedicated to their persona. So I'm going to read the description of Jenny's living room. Jenny's living room is the ideal getaway from the busy pace of a Jeep Compass owner. Candles flicker on the coffee table, a yoga mat's rolled up in the corner, an Elle magazine is on the couch, a Sex and the City DVD plays on the TV, a pet fish swims nearby to keep her company. So this sounds like, and then it was a dark and stormy night, and it's the setup to a story. But it makes Jenny a person, as opposed to, so there are some people, they drive the car. And so that way, when designers are thinking about new features, they can actually go and sit in Jenny's living room and think about what Jenny would need. Now, this is very extreme, but knowing the ends of the spectrum is always nice. And Chrysler's advertising company is the only one I've ever heard of actually doing this. And they're very secretive about it. Like, I have that description. I saw the same article, like, repackaged 5 different times, and there are no pictures of Jenny's living room. I really want to know what Jenny's living room looks like. But so some of the pros and cons of personas, really, it pulls together everything. It tells you where you need to do more research, but it's not held up by not knowing everything. But still, it's the second best to being able to actually talk to your users. And so you are making some educated guesses, but if you forget where you made up the details, you can end up having a false sense of security. You can say, oh, I know this for sure, without realizing that that's a piece that you made up. Also, you have to make the judgment of what's a detail that you can just make up and fill in, and what you really need more information on. Now, same question as personas. How many of you are familiar with user journeys? Okay, fewer of you. So this is when you go from putting on the user hat to really walking in their shoes, seeing how they would do something. And so you think about Roger and you're like, okay, how would Roger do this specific task? So you just take it the next step further. And there's a ton of different levels of fidelity, just as there are with personas. And the key thing that makes a user journey is that it highlights the emotions and the pain points. And so it documents level of frustration from happy to sad, or frustration from negative to positive, but that's the piece that makes it the user journey. So I'm gonna walk you through a sample. So this is buying a new car, something that I'm sure everyone's familiar with. So you start with the really negative emotion of your current car has an engine failure. Womp womp, you need a new one. But then you're researching cars and you found a new model that you like, and hey, there's a special financing offer. Oh, the financing offer isn't really what you thought it was, so that's a bummer. But then you get a call from an employee, you get the alternatives explained, you're waiting to receive the contract. Not fun, but not really bothering you. You sign the financing and purchasing contract. There's some good there and some bad, so it evens out. But then you get a thank you letter, and that just, it makes you feel warm and fuzzy. And then you finally get to ride in your new car. So if you're the person looking at this at the car dealership, well, you can't eliminate the negativity of the car having an engine failure, nor would you want to, because then you would put yourself out of business. But you can see that this person was really upset when the financing offer wasn't what they thought it should be or thought it was. And so if you improve that part of the process, well, maybe the rest of this goes from being close to neutral to being all the way up here. And if people are happier, they spend more money. Because fun fact, when people are happier, they don't focus on the details as much. And here's a user journey that we use with good old Roger. It's really important to also remember which persona your user journey applies to, because you could have personas in the similar role, but they're very different. So one is super tech savvy and one is like, computer, and they would have very different journeys. So, we see here that he enters the system. He's trying to determine the lab date and inspector for making sure that some place is inspected by a certain date. Well, he's getting frustrated here. We should look into that further. He adds inspection and confirms inspection. Okay, everything else is fine. But doing it at this really high level, that tells you where you need to dig in further. And you can dig down to the next step and say, okay, well, that might be a problem. You see it's yellow. It's something we should keep an eye on, but that's probably not where the frustration's coming from. And so then you look at the other option, because there are two ways to perform that step. Oh, okay, there's the problem. Found it. Then, it's not always that cut and dry, but sometimes it is. Sometimes you're like, okay, I need to re-engineer this piece of the process as opposed to just, people are getting frustrated here, we need to start from scratch. So it does take some time when you get started with it, but it saves you a lot of time on the back end.
Oh, sorry, can I just interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
What's the way that you're suggesting to capture the fact that he is unhappy from this? Is this being in the same room with Roger?
So for this particular moment, we're going with the premise that we can't do that. Yes, ideally, you would want to sit with Roger, watch him for a few days, and see exactly what he does, how he performs these tasks. And sometimes that can be incredibly insightful. We had something where we had a list of checkboxes in an inspection, and we realized that the way that people were actually doing these inspections, it didn't flow very well for them. So we gave them some yes, no, not applicable. And so that's something that we never would have been able to get to without actually seeing them. But we're just assuming that right now the best thing we've got is our persona. So you get really familiar with your persona. Like, however you want to do it, if you want to have conversations when no one else is around, whatever it takes for you to get comfortable with saying, okay, I know who this person is. And then wearing that hat, you start going through, okay, I am Roger. Right now, if someone asks me what my name is, I'm Roger. I'm an EHS director. That is what I do. And you go through the process and think about how you would feel if you were Roger. So it's not as precise as we'd like it to be, but again, we're talking about what we're doing when we can't do what we would really like to do to have the most rigor.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So here's another example. This is the Atlassian webinars version of user journey. And just in case you were coming to the conclusion that they're kind of restrictive in what you can do, here's a Pinterest board that has all different user journeys. And all you need to know is no two of them look alike. Because I know the picture is kind of hard for you guys to see from back there. So, pros and cons of user journeys. They're a great deliverable if you're trying to make a business case to someone. You can say, see, this is where the frustration happens. This is the part that we need to rework. Again, you can use your imagination to fill in some of the blanks. And it helps to validate the Google Analytics information. Because if you're seeing the red dot where you're seeing a lot of people drop off, okay, ding, 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 We have a problem, we can solve a problem, we can make things happen. Doesn't always line up that nicely, often doesn't line up that nicely, but it's something to consider and continue triangulating your information. And it is also a living document, just like the personas are. If you have any of your proxies come back and say, hey, by the way, that's not the way people actually do it in the field, then you change it. You've learned something. You now know more. But again, just like with the personas, same weaknesses. It's not as stringent as you would like your research methods to be. You're not controlling the questions being asked. You're not actually seeing things with your own eyes, hearing things with your own ears. And if you forget where you made your assumptions, then you can go off in some pretty funky directions. Now, lastly, the most important piece of this, teamwork. Sounds hokey, but you are depending on other people to give you the information that you need. That means that you need to be giving back to them. You need to be feeding the personas so that they can make their alignments, they can make the judgments they need to make. And sometimes it means that you just need to help them out with something completely unrelated to build goodwill. But you can't do this alone. It doesn't matter how big your UX team is. You can never do it alone. It doesn't matter if you get to talk to your users every day. These people still get different perspectives that are incredibly valuable. So how it all comes together, you've got your user proxies who talk to the UX professional. They develop the personas, figure out who it is that we're talking to, who it is that we are building for. You come up with your user journeys, you make some improvements, because you're not making user journeys just for the sake of it. You're doing this whole thing so that you make your users' lives better. And then you can feed that information back to your proxies so that they can validate it and so that they can be more knowledgeable when they're doing their jobs. So just to recap, not a perfect world. I try really hard. I enjoy my bubble, but reality. Analytics can definitely give you a window to peep in, but it's not enough to just go on that alone. And utilize the people who are doing their jobs around you. It doesn't take much for someone in customer support to say, oh, hey, by the way, Heather, we had that issue again. Just so you have an idea of how big it is. Or sales and marketing, like, yeah, they said that they wouldn't sign because of. Because everyone wants these things to get better because it makes everyone's jobs easier, everyone's days better. And personas and user journeys allow for validation, and it highlights points that you need to look into further. So again, when you're talking to the other people, they can help you focus on that. And so here are some resources, because everything will be available on the Drupal Nights webpage. Sorry, hit a button. And so, do you guys have any questions for me? I know I talked for quite a while. So Leslie?
Yeah, what percent of the budget for a project do you allocate to UX? And how do you get customers to buy in? You know, there's enough trouble for years to buy in project management costs. How do you get them to buy into this cost as well?
So I'm not going to go back to this slide, but when we were talking about the top 12 reasons that projects fail, it's like, okay, well, you're not going to have to redo this as much. You're not going to have as high support costs. You're not going to have your developers having to realize, oh, wait, piece A should talk to piece Q, and now we need to totally revamp everything. So it makes the whole project cheaper, because something that takes $1 to fix in the very early stages of a project will take $100 once it's all done. So it does take someone who has a little bit of, okay, I can think about the future. I am in the position that if I'm dealing with people who don't see that, I say, okay, that's nice, good luck, have a good day, and I walk out. Because those aren't the people that I want to surround myself with. There are enough people who actually want their users' lives to be better. And in terms of what percentage, it depends on the project. It depends on what they already know, what they've done before. But like I was saying before, 0 users, 0 insights. So even if you have to start really small, talk to someone because it will tell you more than you knew already. Michelle?
I want to actually add to that because I would think the larger the project, the larger the budget. So if your web shop is putting out these small sites for mom and pop shops, getting any sort of budget seems futile. However, if your web shop specializes, I only build websites for shops that sell widgets. All of a sudden, you've already productized yourself. Every site is using these same kinds of features, and you've got a template. It's like almost like your own personal distribution. So your usability studies can be up based on distribution because the user base is the same for all of them. It's a way to take those costs and spread it out among many clients.
And also with the mom and pop shops, often that's when you can just, get someone to take a look and see if they can perform the thing that you're supposed to perform on the site. Or again, college kids, really easy to incentivize. So those are the different ways. Yes, sir?
So you showed at the beginning Google Analytics, and you could track the average person's progress through the site, going from step to step, and in many cases where you lost them, where they left the site. It seems like that part directly corresponds to the user journey. That if your analytics don't validate that your journey is accurate, something's wrong with your journey, because those two should roughly line up. That if you've got a high spot where it's frustrating the user, you're probably going to lose people there. If it's a spot that they're enjoying, they should be moving on to the next step you expect them to take. So it's a little bit of a real world feedback that if your personas are accurate, you should be able to go once the site's built, and especially if in the middle of it, as you're trying to figure out where those bad spots are, you should see validation for that same piece.
Yes and no. So they never align as closely as we would like them to, and you don't know that people are leaving because they're frustrated. It could just be that they wanted to check something out when they had a minute, and then, oh, I totally forgot that I have to do this other thing. So that's where the why comes in, and that's why having both those pieces are really good. Because if you are seeing that you're having a high spot here and a low spot there, there's something that you need to dig into. And so, again, it doesn't necessarily give you the answers, but it'll point you in the direction of the right questions to ask, which is sometimes even more valuable. Yeah?
What about for a new company that's not really sure about the target audience or the personas? We're still trying to kind of figure that out.
So there are a ton of different kinds of research you can do. You can do summative research, which is what most people do. It's like, okay, we're just summing everything up, everything's wrapped in a bow, and we want to make sure that everything's all right, or we want to make some minor improvements. So that's mostly what I was talking about. But then there are a ton of other methods to do formative research. Like, okay, so there's going to be a thing, but I don't know what it's going to look like. That's the situation that you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
That's the point that really you can't skimp on the user research. You need to make sure that you know, at least generally, who your users are going to be. But the good news is that research is a lot easier to do in a much less formal manner. I could talk to you separately about all of the things that you can do to do that sort of research, but that's not something that you can do through other people.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
What are some indicators you might have that maybe your personas, like, while they might have been accurate or like a reasonable substitution during a certain stage of development of your product, as it evolves? Like, how can you tell if the personas you're thinking of are still kind of roughly matching who's actually using your product?
So that's where the teamwork and the cyclical nature comes in. You should be updating your personas at least once a year, and even just like revisit and say, okay, yeah, that still sounds right, or something may have changed. Because if you are working with an at all evolving industry, yeah, things are going to change. And so I'd say that the main indicator would be when you're getting calls to customer support that don't make sense, or sales and marketing is hearing something completely like off the wall. And it's like, that's not something Roger would say. And so that's when it's okay, time to reevaluate. Or like Seth was saying, when you have your analytics and your journeys not matching up. That's just telling you that something is off somewhere. It doesn't tell you what and it doesn't tell you where, but it tells you where to look. Yeah.
So, I've got a question. How come something like the Facebook phenomenon happens where they have a large user base and they go through a major UX change, and the number one thing you hear about is the complaints? Because shouldn't those kind of companies have done this research? Is it that they're not doing it? Or are they perceiving something that they're just getting an initial resistance from the most vocal people, and really the majority of their users do like the changes, we're just not perceiving them?
So there are two different things at play there, because it's something that happens anywhere where there is dramatic change. And so you've got those people who are like, I loved the old way. Why are you changing it? Change it back. But then after a little while, they get used to it. And then the next set of changes comes. And it's like, well, I liked the last way. Why are you changing it on me? So part of it is just people don't like change. They are change averse. And so the other thing is users don't necessarily know what it is that they want. They might know what their problems are, but I believe it was Henry Ford who was quoted as saying, well, if you asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. They wouldn't have thought of a car, because why would you think of a car? Like, that's absurd. And Steve Jobs was also a big proponent of that thought of, no, the user doesn't know. We know what's coming next. They don't know. But at the same time, Facebook and Apple are known for having huge UX departments. Google too, for that matter. Although Google's works in a very different way. They have internal people testing and eating their own dog food. And so you have people who are very vested in the success. And so you can see, well, okay, maybe that's a place to start, but maybe you should also go outside of that group who's so vested in success. Yeah, Michelle?
I love how you just said that, they eat their own dog food. I would think one of the best ways to test your website, your web application, is to use it. So, for example, the people who created Open Atrium, wouldn't it be great if they utilized that for some, internal intranets or project management? Because then they would truly know, what's wrong with it. And so Bauer does have some applications inside where we had like an LMS training videos and quizzes. And we're like, wouldn't that be great if we had our new employee training in Bauer? So we went to bauer.com and we could check everything out, and then we would know, wow, that actually doesn't work as cool as I thought it did. Because you're now a true consumer of your own website. I think it'd be a great way to get some really awesome feedback.
And also you get the people who, there are some people on the development end who, stupid user. It's the user's fault. It's user error. It's the system makes perfect sense to me.
We never do that.
Not us, of course. Never. But, in general, there might be someone who says that. And so it's really getting them to understand the struggles that your users have. Because if it is something that, oh yes, you can actually use this in the way that it's meant to be used, go for it. That will give you some really great insight and can also help those people realize, oh, wait, using this is kind of a pain. But at the same time, if it's something where you are not the user at all, like you do not look like the user in any way, shape, or form, that's not going to help you. And so it's really important to know who it is that you are designing and developing for.
You talked about some of the demographic information Google Analytics is starting to provide. Is there any other advice that you give to try to break out user groups?
I am of the opinion that unless the demographics actually matter, don't use them. Does it actually matter if someone is 20 years old or 50 years old? Well, sometimes it does. Or definitely like 20 and 70. Yeah, it definitely matters because like your eyes work differently. You are able to scroll in different ways. So in that sort of case, it definitely matters. But generally male versus female doesn't matter, which is why it bugged me so much that Lego focused on boys from 7 to 12. Might be why I'm more of a Connects girl. But yeah, I mean, it's a real question of what would that information give you to see whether it's worth actually seeking it out. But getting back to what I was saying about the formative information, once you have a better idea of what your users look like and can talk to a more representative group, then you can decide what demographics matter. And from the people that you've talked to, because at that point that you're making those decisions, you will have talked to a large portion of them, you can start to analyze your own research data and get that information. Or you can talk to other people who are in the industry and get data. And so there are a ton of different ways to get around to that same point, but I'm a proponent of do the research yourself and then validate with outside sources.
So when you create your first persona, you want to add a name and a picture so that you can get to know them. But you said also ignore some of that demographic information. Should you just like flip a coin and say this one's going to be a boy, this one's going to be a girl? Just kind of randomly do that?
Unless it matters. Some people get away from using pictures of real people and instead use some sort of sketch. So it's like an artist's rendering of what this person would look like. And so it's rather androgynous. The person doesn't have a particular race or age or anything like that. And again, it depends on what you're doing and who is going to be looking at your personas. If you are with a group that needs to see, okay, no, this is who Roger is, they need a real person's face to be able to attach to that, then do a real person. Creative Commons, amazing. But if you're with a group who will get caught up on, well, but he looks like he's a man of like 50 to 60 and he probably has a kid, and that's when you want to abstract it a little bit. So it's really about knowing who's going to be using the information that you produce and how to best serve them, because they are users of your product that is your research. So it's the same things that apply.